Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us. We're back for the second session of this month. I'm delighted to welcome Elly and Jonas to join us. Hi guys.
Hey there.
Hey.
Hey there. We've got so much fun stuff in terms of the techniques to show you, but this is a busy week. So I'll try and run through some of the housekeeping things as quickly as I can, but there's so many events happening that I wanted to remind you about. And hi to Jay and to Kent and to Saka. So thanks for saying hi. It's all looking and sounding good. This is all great. But just really quickly, see how fast I can do this. If you go to the maxon.net events page, here we go, events, you'll see that we got a busy this week because not only are we running this session right now about getting those lovely reflections and variations in textures and so on, which we'll talk about very shortly, but also you can see that it's the 3D motion show this week. So we've got 3 days worth of events in this week. So this, in case you don't know, this is the show that we put on every month, and usually it's in person, but we've been doing it virtually, of course, and there are multiple different sessions across the days. I'm really looking forward to the perception staff doing a little treatment on WandaVision. That's going to be really exciting, but lots of other things here. Seth's doing a wonderful session, as well as Noseman, and Beeple himself will be closing it up, doing one of his everydays on the Thursday. So it's all free. Just please go to 3dmotionshow.com or click on the link on the events page. Fantastic. But also you'll notice here that the Future Media Concepts are running the post-production world online this month. And if you wanted to, you could sign up for free for all the sessions that we are doing, because we kind of got a training team takeover on the Wednesday. So it starts off at 10 a.m. Pacific, not Pacific, it's Eastern, isn't it? EDT, Eastern Daylight Time. And so Jonas is kicking stuff off. And then Max and Elly and Darren, as well as Tony and also Nick, are running sessions of all sorts of different topics across the whole range of the software that we do at Maxon, including Redshift and all the Red Giant things. So, and of course, Chad's doing a lovely session on After Effects and using Trapcode's lesser known tools to make stuff look amazing really quickly. So if you go to that page, here we go, just on the Maxon site, and go to News, Post-Production World, then you can sign up for free to watch the live sessions. So they do have paid sessions, and they've got amazing sessions which are running at the moment. But if you want to see us do some more things that we haven't shown you before, because these are all new things, then please have a look at that. And in addition to this, we've also got our shirts. So as you know, if regular attendees will know that we like to give you away a shirt that we used to do when we were working in person, when we were talking to you in person. There we get my right teeth in today. But we haven't been able to do that, so we want to thank you for being a member of the community, and please let's give you a shirt, including a shiny new Redshift shirt available in a couple of colors as well. And we'll share the link with you because we got a nice new link, which is, in fact, here we go. If you look in the PDF, the handout section of the webinar, you'll see this PDF, and it's got the links that we're talking about. So here it is. Here's the link for the shirt. Here's the password for that link, and it's good for one shirt. All you have to pay for is shipping, but we'll give this shirt to you for free. And also in this PDF are the links for the project files that we shared last week with Darren and Oliver's wonderful the kind of vine growing project, and how Darren actually recreated that. So that it's Darren's project there. We've also got some things that we're going to talk about this week. So if you go to there, you can download those right now. And yes, we're recording this. This is the link. Watch all the recordings on our YouTube channel. In fact, you just go to Maxon Training Team and you can see all those links. Great. Okay. Sorry about the rush through. There's just so much happening this week that we wanted to share with you. Great. So this week we are talking about visualization specifically to do with product and small items. And I know I mentioned it before, but it's those subtle details in the last 10% that make it really, really stand out and beautiful. So rather than me tell you about it, let me hand over to Jonas, who is going to launch in first, and I'll share the screen with you, Jonas. And yeah, unless I've missed anything out, what have I forgotten as part of this? I'm sure I've forgotten something.
I think you covered everything.
I think I covered it. Great.
Well, it was so much that I can't tell.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, stop listening.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, today we want to talk about product visualization. And I want to start with some of the basics. And what you can see here is a nice Chesterfield sofa. And what I want to show you is how you can turn the 3D model of that sofa with textures and everything in place into a rendering like that. So what we want to do is we want to create this product stage. So what you can see here, we've got a little bit of texture here and a soft transition to here in the background. So it's like infinite. And we also have got a 3-point lighting in here. And I also want to show you how to set this up, because this is a pretty common lighting technique that is not just used in 3D graphics, but of course, this is coming from like real world scenarios, like taking a product shot in a photo studio. And yeah, this is what we want to create. And I'm going to start right away. So have a look at this image again. Regarding 3-point lighting, maybe just as a little bit of a starter, we have a key light, which is coming from the right here. This is like the main light direction. Then we've got a fill light, which is yeah, just kicking up, lighting up the areas that have not been covered by the key light, more or less. And then you almost always have a rim light to define the shape of the product better. So you can clearly see the shape here. All right, and that's it. Now we're going to recreate that. And here I've got my scene with the sofa and the materials already in place. And other than the sofa, we've got a light target object. This is an object where I want all of the lights that I'm creating later to look at. All right, so let's first create a ground plane, and I'm going to use a disk for that. And I'm also going to make this a little bit bigger, like 20 meters. And now let's bring up our Redshift viewport IPR. And I'm going to dock this here right between the object manager and the attributes manager. And I'm just going to hit play, which will start the rendering. And as you can see, this is not looking very impressive because we didn't set up any lighting, we didn't set up the stage yet, and so on. So I want to start with the 3-point lighting, and in a second step, I want to show you how you can make the stage look good. So what we want to do first is we want to create a camera, and I want to create a Redshift camera right away, because usually when we are navigating around here in the Cinema 4D viewport, we are using a camera with a focal length of 36 millimeters. And that's usually not a focal length that you would use in product visualization. It's more like 50 and up. So I'm going to use a focal length of 50. And the next thing I want to do is I want to create some light sources. And in a photo studio, they are always using softboxes. And the best way to like recreate a softbox is just by using an area light. So I'm going to use this area light. I'm going to create this. And as you can see, it's somewhere behind the sofa. And we need to set it up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the rendering here, and I'm going to my 4 views. Here you can see it's right behind the sofa. And I'm going to move it to somewhere like here, or maybe let's just keep the rendering running all of the time. So this is what we have now. So it's looking way more interesting than before. But of course, we need to adjust a few things. First of all, usually the softboxes that you might place like in front of the object are a little bit smaller. So if I select the area light and go down here to the shape, you can see that it's 2 meters by 2 meters. So I'm going to bring this down to 1 meter by 1 meter. And then I'm going to, to make it look at this null that I created before. And in order to do that, I'm going to create a target tag from the animation tags. And in here, we can just drag and drop the light target into the target object slot. And actually, this should work, and it does. Now, if I move this object around, you can see it here in the top view that our light is looking at the couch or at this null all of the time. And I'm going to bring this up a little bit to something like this, and maybe to something like this. I think that's okay. And if we have a look at the couch now, then we see that this key light is our main light direction for this shot. And what this means is that the main responsibility of this light is to make this shot look interesting. And I think we're doing a pretty good job here, because we're already having like light reflections in here, like reflections of the light source. We are having it here, and we are breaking like the boring plane surface, so to speak, in a way that we're having a specular or a reflection up here, but it's like a gradient to no reflection. And here at the Chesterfield lean, you can see that this is looking very 3D-ish. So there's a lot of depth in there. It's not flat, and you can really work all of this out by using the correct lighting angle and so on. Okay, let's say we are happy with this one. This is our key light, so maybe let's rename it. And I'm going to create a copy of this one. And I'm going to call this fill. And the job of the fill light is to brighten up areas that didn't receive any light yet. So in this case, it would be this side, the left side of the object. So let's move this light to the other side, like here. And one thing you should know about the fill light is that the fill light is always less intense than the key light. So let's bring down the intensity here. It's just there to lighten up parts that have been very dark before, to something like that. And at this stage, let me double check if I have my GI enabled, because that's always something that you should enable in the Redshift section here. Go to GI, and yes, GI primary GI engine and secondary GI engine are both set to brute force here. So GI is already working. That's perfect. And the last thing I want to add here, because it's a 3-point lighting, we need a third light, of course, is the rim light. And I'm going to rename this to rim light. And the rim light is there, or the rim light's job is to define the shape of the object better, to create like this little light rim that shows the silhouette of the object. In a photo studio, usually what they have is like a big softbox on the ceiling of the studio. So what we do here is we want to bring the size up to something like, let's say 4 meters by 3 meters, or maybe 2 meters is enough. But that's about the size they have in a real photo studio. Maybe it's even bigger. And then we're going to place this guy here. And you can see that this edge here is already defined quite well. I'm going to move the light a little bit more to the right, so we're getting this reflection also on this part of of the lean of the side. And let me also make this full screen now. And I think that's already looking pretty good. I just want to go up with the intensity a little bit. And that's already cool now. So this is our 3-point lighting. Let's have a look at the lights separately again. So what we have here, that's the key light coming from the right. This is our main light direction. Then we've got the fill light. This is just something that is lightening up all of the areas that have not been lit by the key light. And then we've got the rim light, which is creating this silhouette here to define the object shape. And if we switch all of them on, we've got this. All right, if we want to turn that into like a better product shot, what we need to do is, of course, we need to create a material for the floor, for the ground, and also we need to adjust the lighting for the ground. And the cool thing about 3D is, and that's what I love about it, that you can exclude objects from the lighting of specific lights. So that's something that is really handy. So what we can do is we can select all of our Redshift lights, and this is also possible with Cinema 4D standard lights. There's a tab called Project, and there's a list, and that's an exclude list. So everything that you put into that list will be excluded from the lighting. You can also set this to include, but we will keep it at exclude. And I'm just going to drag and drop the disk in, and now we have the sofa on black. So this is already looking quite nice, but I want to create the product stage now. So, well, at least the shading for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, and I'm going to create another material, a Redshift material. And because our renderer is set to Redshift, we can create a new node material, and this will create a node material with all of the Redshift nodes in it. I'm going to rename this to floor, and I'm going to assign the material to the disk. And now you can see that we've got a reflection going on here. Right, what I want to do is I double click this one, and then I select my material node. Actually, we don't have to open up the nodes here. We can just click the material, and then here in the attributes manager, we can click the material node here, and then we've got all of the settings. And the only thing I want to do for now is I want to bring up the reflection roughness to something like, well, something around 30. All right, and the next thing I want to do is I want to create a backplate, because if we have a look at the top view, you can see that we've got our ground plane, our disk here, but there is nothing in the background. So what I will do is I create a plane, and I will make it a child of the camera so that it follows the camera all of the time, and yeah, acts as a backplate. So let's create a plane like so. Here it is. I'm going to make it a child of the camera. Then I'm going to hit this little button, Reset PSR. This will place it in the very same coordinates as the camera. And then I'm going to move it here away from the camera and adjust its orientation, like so. And I'm gonna scale it up. So now I've got a backplate. And if I move my camera now, like so, you can see that the backplate is always moving with the camera. Okay, let's move this back. So, and let's create a material for this backplate. So this backplate is actually reflected in the floor. So we are controlling our background color by using this backplate here, which is quite cool. So let's create a new node material here. And I'm going to bring down the weight for the diffuse color and also for the reflection. And instead, I'm just going to the overall tab. And in the overall tab, I'm going to bring up emission weight to 1. And if I now bring up the emission color, we can see that we are bringing up the color of the background if we assigned the material, of course. Here we go. So that's looking good. You can see that this is our background color up here. So we can adjust the color and we can see the reflection. One thing I don't like here is that we have a hard line here between the floor and the background. And I want this to be a soft transition. So what I do is I go to the floor object, and this is going to be my backplate. And in the floor object, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a ramp. And by using this ramp, I want to control the opacity of the floor disk. So I set this to solo so that we can see our gradient. And then I'm going to set the gradient from vertical to circular. And if I scroll down, I can invert the gradient by right-clicking it. And now I'm going to bring the black knot here more towards the middle and the white knot to something like this. And this gradient is going to control the opacity. White areas mean that that the floor will be 100% opaque, and black means that it's completely transparent. So where do we need to plug this to? I'm just gonna grab a wire here and release it on the left side of the material node, and then I'm going to go to overall opacity. And I'm going to deactivate solo mode. And here we go. Now we've got a soft transition here, and we can control the color by adjusting the background. And the other thing we can do, we can add a little bit of structure here. I won't go into detail a lot here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for planks in the content browser, and I'm going to use planks texture, maybe this one. I'm going to bring that in, and I'm going to have a look at the planks texture only. So it's way too big, as you can see. So let me scroll down and bring up the scale, which is actually the tiling, to 10 by 10. And here we go. Maybe we can adjust the gamma a little bit to something like this. And then we can pipe this into the reflection roughness. And here we go. Now we've got this nice little structure here. So yeah, that's how I would do it. And if we have a look at the backplate again, we can adjust the color a little bit and make it darker, maybe something like that. And we could also just reduce the structure here to the area right around the couch. But I would just create another circular gradient here and mask the planks texture with it. All right, so let's move on. Let's go to the next scene. I'm quite happy with this one.
Just before you move on there,
yes.
Jonas, there's a couple of questions that have come in that I think are quite relevant. Sharon was asking about the Redshift materials, and can that be done with a node material rather than the Redshift material?
Yes.
I have also answered privately.
Yeah,
Does that help?
yes, this is for the benefit of the people watching the recording, because we answer
I'll be
live
doing it
questions, of course, as well.
in the Redshift shader graph, if that helps.
Okay.
In a sec.
Well, you can do it in the Redshift shader graph, but you can also create these type of materials, like with Cinema 4D standard and physical materials. Also, like the Cinema 4D node-based materials.
Excellent. And Sharon very helpfully points out that she's going to be working on a project that this will definitely be useful for. So this is great. This
Cool.
is why we run these things. Fantastic.
Perfect. So if it's a visualization project where you want to like visualize also a little bit of like animation of leans for the arms and so on, then the next part is going to be even more exciting for you.
Yes, if you like that, then check out this.
Yeah.
Also, really quickly, Jay had a question about can you map an image to the backplate in the node editor?
Well, since this is just a plane, of course, whenever you use an image here, it will show up, definitely. Yeah. I can just add an image here to the diffuse color, or to the emission in this case.
I also had to just make a side note that I love the rim lighting that you're getting to making this echo in the 3-point lighting, what we have to do typically in a setup on a real life shoot. So it's very interesting that you're using those same techniques.
Yeah, I mean that's what you have to do in order to make it stand out from the background. I mean it's a technique that's also very useful for green screen shoots and stuff like that. So it's in photography, it's also in live broadcasting with green and blue screens and so on. So yeah, it's coming from the real world. It's nothing 3D people invented.
Exactly, but it's just interesting that you can use that same knowledge if you're transferring your skills into the 3D world.
Absolutely, yeah. All right, did we have any other questions? Or...
We did. We had a quick follow-up from Sharon. If we're going to add an image to the plane, do you need to make sure that the size ratio is the same? I think the aspect ratio.
That would make sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you don't want it to be like squashed or stretched, then yes. But that's quite easy. If you know the size ratio of your image, you can also just make the plane like the very same size ratio and then scale it up or down. So that really doesn't matter. I just used a square one for now. But you can also do like let's see, by 2, and let's out of this. So this would be a 16:9 thing, and then you can just use the scale tool and make it bigger or smaller as you prefer. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so the next project I want to show. By the way, we're going to overrun. I can pre-warn you. I can give this little heads up here.
Shocker.
A shocker. We never do that usually, but today, first time. So what we have here is a setup that shows that you can mix in folds based on where the folds should be. And if you bend this object here to the other side, you get these stretchy folds here. And this is something you could use if you have like a flexible side of a sofa. And there are many sofas that have this. Then you could use this technique here. And I'm going to show you how you can set this up. So let's directly dive into it. So what I have here is just a cube. It's just a cube with a little bit of subdivision here. and I've got a bend deformer on that, and then I've got these funny tags, and these are responsible for the whole effect. So I'm gonna delete them for now, and I'm also gonna jump into the node material. Don't be afraid. This is actually pretty simple. Yeah, and if I hit render now, we've got this going on. Perfect. And if I bend, nothing is happening. Perfect. All right, good starting point. Right, so what we need first is we need Cinema 4D to detect whether parts of the geometry are squashed or stretched. And we can do that by adding a tag that is called tension tag. And it's in the rigging tags, tension. And this tag is capable of doing that. So what we need to do first is we need to set the initial state, and you can do that by pushing this fix tension button. Now that I did that, Cinema 4D knows that this is the initial state. And from here, when I deform it, it's going to detect if polygons are squashed or stretched. And we need an output for that, of course, because at some point we need to create a mask for these folds and for the stretching. And we simply have to go down here to the fold map and the stretch map and just create these by pushing these two buttons. This will create two vertex maps, and a vertex map is basically a map which stores a weight per point on the geometry, per vertex. So this is the map for the stretches, and this is the map for the folds. And if I now bend this object, you can see that we're getting a yellow area. Yellow means 100% weight, red means 0% weight. And of course, this is a little bit too strong, so we need a better, well, fall off from like full weight to no weight, or the other way around. And I'm just going to bring up the amount here to, let's say, 5. And now let's have a look at how this is behaving. Now you can see that this is pretty cool. So we're having like just a little bit of weight here as it's getting orange and more yellow. And here we've got like the full weight. And this is exactly what we need. And now we need to read this out. On the stretch map, we have the opposite, by the way. Now we need to read this out and just, yeah, add some folds in a texture in a Redshift material or any other material. You can also use these vertex maps like in Cinema 4D standard and physical materials. All right, let's go back to a strength of 0 here. And let's have a look at the node setup. So let me first start the rendering, and I'm going to have a look at the node material. And what we have here is, it's not very difficult. I'm just using a noise here for the diffuse color, and I'm using another noise as a bump map. Okay, what we need is just another noise. Of course, we can like really create a folds map by using sculpting, for example. But for now, we're going to use a noise to keep it all procedural. And I'm going to solo this noise. And now that we have this noise soloed, we can set it up. This is going to be the folds, the noise for the folds, which have to go this way. And so I adjusted the relative scale, the non-uniform scale in X direction to 10. And I'm going to bring down the scale of everything like so, maybe a little bit less. This is looking good. Okay, and then I'm going to use a copy of this one. And I'm going to create this stretch map. So this is going to be for the folds. This is going to be for stretch. And in the stretch noise, we're doing like the opposite. We're just setting the X scale to 1 and the Z scale to 20. Let's solo this guy. This is looking good. And maybe let's go down to an overall scale of 15 or 0.12. Yeah, that's looking good. All right. And now we want to pipe these two noises into the bump input. So let's create a bump map node. And I'm going to just input the noise in here. And then I'm going to pipe this into the bump. And now what we see is our creases, but they are not masked yet. I just want to make sure that they are working. And I'm going to create a copy of this guy and wiring up the stretch noise. So that's a little bit too heavy. So let's bring down the height scale to 0.3. That's definitely enough, maybe even a little bit less. But what we want to do is we want to blend between these three here. And what we need in order to do that is a node called Bump Blender. With this one, we can mix bumps. So let me input the first one, like the leather bump, and put it into the base, and just output this one here to the bump map. Then we're going to use this bump map node and use it in layer 0 as the bump input. And the cool thing now is that I can blend between these two simply by adjusting the bump weight. You can see it here. If I bring this up to 1, then it's the full false noise. And if I bring it down to 0, it's gone. And the same thing would happen with the stretch noise. But what we need here is the mask. We need to mask this noise to appear only where we need the folds. And since we have vertex maps here, we can search for a node which is called vertex attribute. And we're just going to bring in one of these guys. And there is an attribute name field here. And what we need to do is we just need to drag and drop a vertex map in here. And this is going to be our link from the vertex map into the Redshift material. For Cinema 4D materials, there is a vertex map shader. Okay, and then we output the scalar output and pipe it into layer 0 blend weight. And that's actually the full setup for the folds. Now, if I play with the strength, we can see that we're getting these creases, but only in this area where we need them. All right, now let's do the opposite thing for the stretch noise. We're going to create a copy of this guy here. And instead of using the folds vertex map, we're going to use the stretch vertex map. And now we just need to wire them up also into the bump blender node. Let's go to layer 1, bump input, and the vertex map into layer 1 blend weight. And that's the full setup. So let's double check if it works. If we go up, you can see that we're getting these folds. And if we go in the other direction, you can see that we get these stretchy folds. All right. Looking cool. That's the first stuff that I wanted to show. Are there questions so far? Otherwise, we can hand over to Elly.
There are, yes, there are. The one small thing, I just wanted to remind everyone that you can download and work on the very projects that Jonas has just been showing. The link to that download is a Dropbox link, and then we have all the files that we talk about in this month's sessions in there. And if you want that link, plus the other links to the recording and some of the other resources inside the handout section of the GoToWebinar software, there is a PDF with visualization links in it. And we also post those links in the YouTube channel and descriptions when we post the recording, which we'll do in a few hours' time. But there's been some questions about working on a Mac in Redshift. And thank you for the questions about the Redshift version. It's in open beta at the moment, and the answer of the timing, we hope it to be soon. Thank you for bearing with us. I know we've said soon for a long time, but we really do are excited for when the final version becomes available. But you can, of course, download and play with the open beta right now, and we'll put that link in there as well. But the other question that came up was using an eGPU on a Mac rather than necessarily buying a new Mac. And that's something that you've been doing recently, Jonas, isn't it?
Absolutely, that's my setup here. So I'm working on a MacBook Pro here, and I've got the Radeon Pro W5700 in a Sonnet box. So that's my setup. It's an eGPU setup. It's connected via Thunderbolt, of course, and yeah, it's working.
Excellent.
So
and that's a Sonnet. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, what was it again?
Just going to say that's a Sonnet 650, I believe, and the difference in Sonnets is to do with the power supply. So there's one thing, if you're thinking about doing this on various different types of cards, just have one look out for the power supply that you're needing to use depending on what card you've got. That's an important thing. Plus, it needs to be a laptop that supports Thunderbolt 3. So it's, as well as the USB-C actual plugs, it needs to support that protocol, which is the versions that came out, the Retina versions that have been out for the last couple of years, I believe.
Yeah, that's the point. So it does work on a MacBook Pro, but I think it doesn't work on a MacBook Air. At least with the new ones, it doesn't work. And because they are just USB. It's no Thunderbolt in there.
I think so. And although Cinema is when M1 enabled, I did read recently that there might not be a compatibility if you had a M1 machine with Thunderbolt and eGPU. So I still need to research that. Certainly it works in the versions which are still Intel chips, but that's just something to look out for when you're checking. And by the time you watch this recording, it might be completely compatible. So I just want to bring it up as something else to check.
Yeah, I already tried it on a new M1 MacBook Air, so that doesn't work. It doesn't detect the eGPU.
Got it. Okay, so just a few little things to look out for. And some people have been mentioning this kind of setup with a 5700 and so on.
Yeah.
With an eGPU, yes, absolutely. Thank you, Sharon. And Anders is working fine with a 550 or 500 with 8 GB of RAM on there on the 16-inch MacBook Pro. It sounds like. So it sounds, for some of you, it's working as an option. Great. I love this quote from Nick. C4D on M1 works like a beast, by the way. Thank you for that, Nick. This is great to hear. Thank you very much. Cool. Okay, great. So we'll continue to ask questions as we go along, both hopefully live and also on the chat. So please keep them coming in. And are we handing over to you now, Elly?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, for a bit more product shot lighting stuff.
Great.
Here comes the screen.
Cool.
Throw the screen at you. There we go.
Right, let me know if you can see.
Yes.
It's okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So yeah, I thought I'd show, I've got two little scenes to show. This first one is sort of like a vase setup, and the next one is like the phone shot that we saw in the thumbnail. And yeah, so I've just got like some tips and tricks for when it comes to like setting up things like this. So I guess the first thing is to look at my scene. And so at the moment I've got all my lighting switched off, I think. Yeah, all my lighting switched off. And if I just come out of here, what I've got is these three vases here, which I just took from the content browser. So they're sort of these little bits here. And then I've got a backdrop. So the same way Jonas used a disk and then a plane on his camera, another quite common technique is to use a plane and a bender format. And it's super simple to set up. If I just sort of like hide this, grab a plane and just sort of make that a bit bigger, grab a bend deformer and sort of drop that as a child of my plane, and put my strength just up a little bit just so I can see it working. And I just need to rotate this sort of 90 degrees. There we go. And now I can just sort of make sure my strength is set to 90 as well. And then we get this nice sort of like backdrop that you would have like we all talked about in a real product shot, sort of not in 3D and kind of like the real world. You would often have a backdrop sort of similar to this, and it creates this really nice sort of smooth effect. And what we can do is in our plane, what you'd want to do is just increase your width segments to, I don't know, something like 64, just so you get that nice curve. And as the light hits it, it will sort of like add some additional lighting. And there's some other like tricks we can do in a sec to kind of create some shadows on this backdrop. So just because I've got my other one set up with my texture, I'm just going to delete that one and reactivate my original one. And so for this scene, as Jonas was saying, we've got like a 3-point lighting set up amongst other things. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to like kick off my render view, but I'm just going to select RS camera in my drop down. So that means I can mess around in my perspective view, but I can still see the effects in what will end up being like my final render shot from my camera. So that's a handy little tip there. And so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to switch on my lights one by one. So I've got my key light, which is just to the left of my camera here. And if I switch that on, it's creating this really nice contrast here and adding some of like, it's my brightest light effectively. If I come into general, the intensity set to 50, and it's just adding that like the main light for my scene. My second is to the right, which is my fill light, which is over here, and it's not quite as bright, but what it's doing is bringing back, so if I switch that off, we're losing all of the detail in this like nice marble texture. So we're using the fill light to kind of just bring that back. And then finally, the rim light just kind of like brings back those edges. And I've used that really to sort of just sort of bring the edge of this like frosted glass texture here. And so that's like a really nice starting point. And so already it looks a lot nicer than it did when we had no lights. But now we can look at what we can add on top of this to create some really nice, I wanted some like quite natural looking lighting as well. And so for that, I actually use a dome light. A dome light is what I use in a lot of my renders, whether it's like a product shot or kind of like a, I don't know, massive cyberpunk scene or something. And in there, I've got a HDR image. And if you're not using Redshift, you could use a sky and a HDR image on that to create the same kind of effect. And you could use Cinema 4D area lights in the same way that I'm using my Redshift area light. So this isn't just Redshift specific stuff. So if I switch on my dome light, this should make quite a like drastic difference. And it's created some really nice natural lighting thanks to the use of my HDR. What I've done, I've actually decreased my exposure because I've already got a couple of lights in there. I didn't want things to be like blown out. Okay, so the next thing.
Ellie, can I just ask you a couple of questions that have come up?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Just while we jump in there. So
yeah.
The render is asking, the renders are so clean, what are your Redshift settings? So yes, there's one setting in Redshift for brilliant renders. There's so many of them, but I just wondered, is there a particular go-to thing that you used to get clean renders?
Yeah, so my personal workflow is I use brute force as my two GIs. I increase my GI bounces from 3 to 6, just to kind of like eradicate any unnecessary noise. And that means sort of like the lights are bouncing more without getting too technical. And then sometimes I do, I override samples, but you could also do automatic sampling. But for me, I like override my samples and I'll bump those maybe to like 512, like in particular reflections and light. I could even show it. I don't know why I'm standing here like not
I was going to
showing.
say that automatic sampling
I just
is
love
really,
explaining
really
it.
nice trick.
So
Yes.
yeah, basically this is the setup that I have. So my primary, my secondary are brute force. Sometimes I'll do a radiance point cloud, and then my number of rays I do is 1024. And then optimization, I haven't here, but sometimes I bump reflection and refraction up to 16. But I mean, I didn't there, and it came out quite nicely. I've actually got a final render I can show. So yeah, we'll just ignore that one. So this is what it will eventually look like once we've made a couple of changes. And this was using these settings here. Did I override these samples? Yeah, okay. So I overrode reflection, refraction, light. So these are only to 128. So it's nothing too heavy. And then sometimes if it is too noisy in the shadows, you can just like bring the samples up from the light here. But I mean, this is my personal workflow. This is what I did to get this render here. But a lot of it, like lighting, texturing, and render settings, is like your 3 prongs that you need. So if your textures are great, but your lighting isn't, then your render won't come out looking as nice. So it's kind of like they're the 3 things that you want to kind of be focusing on for a nice looking render, like something like this. That was pretty long way of answering it.
No, that's perfect. That's really good. I mean, that's the kind of key detail that's useful when you're experimenting. And I think that's the other thing, just experimenting and then changing the settings depending on what you're wanting to achieve too. The one other question was Cycle, so forgive me for mispronouncing your name, that's my job, as we all know here, that mentioned something about HDR images and then using, well, it was more of a question really, using an HDR from an outdoor one in an indoor shot. And I just wanted to reference that question with, we've chatted about this in the past, and I remember Lionel, VC Domini, talked about using HDR images, and he has a favorite one that he uses for everything, just because he knows it so well. And it just doesn't matter what the scene is, whether it's indoor or outdoor, that's his go-to one. So I just wondered about your approach to using HDR images as well.
Yeah, so I guess it depends on the look that you want. So for me, for this particular render, I wanted it to be a product shot, but to look like sort of natural lighting. So to have this really nice, like outdoorsy feel. And in a little bit, I'll add some shadows, which will sort of add to that kind of like outdoor natural feel. And I do some stuff that like involves like a lot of like neon lighting or like streets, and for that I've got a particular set of like outdoor HDR images, and that's because they add to the color. So I guess it really depends on like what you're going for. Yeah, and on the phone shot I use a studio HDR, which would be like an indoor one that you can see like the softboxes around. So for me it depends a lot on the scene that I'm creating. But yeah, I do use some, if it's like the same type of scene, I have like a recurring set of HDRs as well, but I guess we all must have that. We all have our favorites like in a little like box on our desktop.
I also answered this question privately, but my 2 cents on this is that since we're working in 3D, the cool thing about 3D is that our setups don't necessarily have to be correct. They just have to look good. That's the cool thing. We are not a branch which needs to like create stuff create stuff in 3D that needs to work in real life later. It just needs to work visually. And well, that's why you can like use an indoor or an outdoor HDR in an indoor scene, or why you can also just exclude like a floor object from the lighting, for example. So it just adds to, well, if it adds to the shot, but you have all of this art directional freedom, if that's even a word.
It is now.
Yes, it is now. In fact, Nick raises an interesting point. He says he's a photographer and making studio shots eliminates all the light except for the strobes. And I think you've answered that in part because of the fact that we're cheating to make something look great. But would you say that would, okay, two questions here. One, would you, if you eliminated HDR, would that technically make the renders longer? And secondly, there was another answer from Jonathan about, I think it was Jonathan, no, it was Jay, sorry, that is there going to be much of a render hit if you were using higher resolution HDRs like 4K ones?
Ooh.
Well, the point about HDRs is that they are usually very high res, so you can. Yeah. It's not a rare thing that you have like an 8K HDR. So I didn't test it, but I never like really noticed like a.
Yeah, I guess there would
like
perhaps be a hit because it's trying to run a high resolution. Like it's got that information that's a higher resolution. But I mean, yeah. With what I've got like one 4K texture, which is my HDR, and so I don't notice a difference. Whereas if I had perhaps a lot of high resolution like textures.
Yeah, and another thing that is important is that I think it is a little bit slower in rendering than lighting just with area lights, for example. But the main advantage you have if you are using an HDR panorama or a dome light is that everything is based on reflections, and you need something to reflect in objects, even if you don't necessarily notice that like a specific material, like for example a carpet, is reflecting, but it is because everything is reflecting. And you need something to be in these reflections. If you have like a like industrial visualizations, there you have a lot of steel surfaces that are plain, and you need something interesting to reflect in there, or to be reflected in there, because otherwise the shots would just look boring. So the reflection is the key, and therefore you need HDRs or panorama textures.
That leads perfectly to the next two questions about this. So apologies, everyone. We're going to slightly overrun because we've got a couple of other interesting things to show. If you're watching the recording, then you'll probably see that from the duration of it. But if you're live with us now, of which you are, of course, then I'm sorry about this. But whenever we ask, as a side note, whenever we ask, should we overrun or not, we overwhelmingly are asked, yes, it doesn't matter. Keep telling us the details. And it's a balance because we want to respect your time as well. So this is why we're making the recording so freely available. But anyway, so quick questions before we jump on to the next bit, Elly. One is from Daniel, and I'll tie these two questions together because they're kind of related. But Daniel's asking, is there a way to deal with the double shadows you get from the area lights as well as the shadows from the HDRI? And then also, Jonathan is asking, can you control the reflected light between the two objects as they are so close together, especially if there's color interaction? So how you balance with the shadows and the color interaction are the two questions, really.
Yeah, so I'm not too sure about the second question. I don't know if you do, Jonas, but when it comes to casting shadows, you might have to remind me where this is. There is a way to make a light not cast shadows. Oh, here we go. So we can do it in Cinema 4D lights, and there must be a way to do it in Redshift lights.
Is it in the shadow tab? You just the enable checkbox.
Let me set this off. Do you know what? Let's do it with one of the lights that I've actually got. Right, so let's do this one. There you go. So literally enable shadow button. So you could choose which of your lights are enabling and casting shadows. And the same way, I know this is not a question that was asked, but another little trick, if you don't want to see these reflections, we can also come into the Ray tab, and under contribution affect specular, we can actually switch these off as well, which is something that I did in the final render. because I didn't want to be seeing these. So they're still having an impact on the lighting of our scene, but they're no longer kind of showing up in this reflection. So yeah, so to answer the question, shadows enable here, and then any kind of like reflections affect specular. And then the second question, I'm not too sure about that.
I think it's a little bit about color bleeding, because with global illumination, you always have the effect of color bleeding. For example, if you have like this red vase here, then this can reflect red color, or yeah, bleed into the white vase in terms of like color.
Okay.
Like, I'm not sure if there's a way to prevent that. I'm not aware of one.
Me neither.
This is a great question for our Ask the Trainer set Thursdays, isn't it? So we can have a look and then follow up.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we should invite Adrian at some point.
That's
Yeah.
true. Yes. In fact, what we're planning is on one of the near future Ask the Trainers, we're going to dedicate it to Redshift, so we can kind of extend this idea. Because the nice thing about these sessions is that we want to show you something and then also answer your questions too. And the Ask the Trainer sessions, if you haven't been, are purely question answering. So it's an unstructured hour where we just let you throw questions at us. So we'll mark that one in, and we'll schedule that and have a look at the events page on the Maxon site, and we'll update that shortly. So that was the longest interruption ever. Sorry, Elly.
No, it's fine. It's cool. Loving
This
the
is why we
questions.
do this, of course. So,
Exactly.
At this point, we
Okay,
have to
cool.
say that we're not going to slightly overrun, but to significantly overrun.
Yeah. Disclaimer, 1 hour in.
yes.
Okay, cool. So just really quickly, there's a couple more things I want to show. So I already explained about the affecting specular. So we turned off those reflections because we didn't want to see those. Well, I didn't want to see those in my render. The only other thing I did was I added like a top light, which I've got a bit of a color on, which is this, and it's just sort of brightens up everything and sort of creates this really nice sort of almost glow on my backdrop. And this final area light relates to, so what I did was I had it like this, and I quite liked it, and I thought this looks really nice, it's really natural, but it looked really flat and a little bit kind of like plain. And I was trying to think of a way that I could create some nice looking like shadows on my scene, just kind of add a bit of a different vibe. And what I ended up doing was, if I just like kick this off, and again, RS camera, in the content browser, if we come up to 3D Objects Vol 2, we have like a plants section, and let me find out which one it was, European Trees Young, I grabbed this like hackberry tree, threw it in my scene, shrunk it down, and then just sort of repositioned it. Might need to be a bit smaller actually. Repositioned it. See, a lot of this is just kind of like moving things around and defining stuff. And it ended up creating some really nice looking shadows in here. And I thought this added a bit of like I don't know, it was like a bit cheesy, but like a second dimension to it, and just had like this natural looking look. And what we can do is with this area light here, if I switch that on, I just had it kind of like shining through, just to sort of exaggerate these like shadows a little bit more. And then on my tree, because of course we don't want to be seeing this in our actual shot, we can just right click, go to Redshift tags, object, and under visibility, we have this primary ray visible and secondary ray. And if we uncheck primary ray, we still are casting our shadows, but it's actually hidden from our final render. And I thought it really added like a nice little addition. And as Simon was saying, those kind of that final 10%, or in this case the final 1%, I found this made like a really big difference. And if I sort of like open this back up, like I really just liked this final look. I thought it really added to like this whole natural style as opposed to it looking a little bit flat originally. So yeah, that was the kind of tips for this particular scene. And really quickly, because I am conscious of us overrunning, I wanted to run through this phone shot here. If I just sort of kick this off. So this is using a couple of techniques to get these nice reflections. And what I'm going to do, just so we can get an idea of what it looks like normally. I'm not sure why I've got two dome lights going on. But so this is what it looks like. I've got two phones here, and these are from TurboSquid. But in the content browser, we also have like a mobile phone model that you can use to recreate this kind of thing. And I've just sort of positioned them at a 45-degree angle and sort of got one like slightly off center of the other one, and yeah, got them both on there. So again, I'm going to sort of build this from scratch, kind of with the time that I've got. So if I grab a dome light, initially it's going to be just pure white. What I want to do in my content browser, if we search, oh, it's already in there, the word studio, we get this really nice softbox studio HDR. And my main reason for using this is this little kind of blue dot here, because it creates some amazing blue reflections, and that's just really nice for like a tech product shot. So if I come to my top view, I'm just going to rotate this round just so I get them to hit that. Just that top corner there is really nice. And then within my dome light, because I don't want to see my background, I want my plain black background, I can just switch off this checkbox here. And then what I did was I grabbed an area light. I'm going to rotate this round 90 degrees. I'm just holding shift to do that in increments of 5, but I did that one wrong. Move this back, and then I'm just going to shrink this down. I want it to be like really slim because I want to get like a nice fine line, and so I'm going to do something like 0.2 in my size on my X, and then 100 on my Y, and then I'm just going to rotate it 45 degrees, which matches the angle that my phones are at. And then just sort of gonna, and then all of this is sort of a lot of tweaking and defining where you want them to go. So in the original shot, I spent quite a bit of time sort of deciding where I wanted these to be, which of course on this webinar, we do not have all of that time. So I'm just gonna really quickly place this somewhere. Maybe that's a way too big actually. Let me just do that. Right, so we're using it to sort of define this edge here. There we go, so we can sort of bring that up, and it sort of just like brings that edge out a bit more. But what's happening is it's causing a reflection on this phone, this top phone as well, which I don't want to do. So we can use that same technique that Jonas was doing when we just right click, not right click, sorry, we come into project and we have our mode set to exclude, and we can just drag and drop our top phone, and it will no longer be causing a reflection on that phone, which is super handy. So I don't have to worry about positioning it perfectly for the two phones. And the only other thing I did was I changed the color so it matched this sort of color here that was coming in from the HDR. And then my intensity is a bit too high, so move that to something like 20. And what I did the same thing to bring out this line here, and again to bring this curved edge here. And so already we've got this looking a little bit nicer compared to when we had kind of like no lighting in there. And really quickly, before I hand back over to Jonas, I wanted to show you how you can create like a plane with an emissive material, and using the ramp node again to affect the opacity, we can create like a gradient of a light sort of like glaring down onto here. So if I just sort of like flick this one on, you can see the effect that we're going to be creating. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab a plane, And I already know, I think it needs to be like 7 by 10. And then I'm just gonna lift this up. And we want it to be on top of our top phone. Cool, so what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna pause this just whilst I create this material. So what I want to do, in my RS material, normally when you first open up your shader graph, it will be showing you the base properties. If you come over to overall, go into the emission, we're going to grab this blue color because I am a big fan of this, obviously today. I'm going to set my emission weight. And the way that you could do this, just to sort of explain Cinema 4D, but like materials versus Redshift materials, is this is the equivalent of like the luminance channel. So normally where you click on the illuminance, this is like the same thing, clicking on the emission. I'm gonna grab my ramp node, and this is all we need. And all we're gonna do is plug this in to our overall opacity color. And if you watch my little preview up here, if you can see that, when I plug that in, now we're starting to get some opacity. And what's happening is our ramp is a gradient of black to white. And if you watch that, as I move my black knot across, we're getting more of like more of a 100% opacity gradient happening. And the way you would do this, I believe, in a Cinema 4D material would be to switch on the alpha channel and then use a gradient and then use that gradient in like a vertical mode to control this exact same effect with the luminance channel. So I'm going to drag this onto my plane and I'm going to kick this off. And what's happening is our gradient is the wrong way around. And so we need this to be flipped. And the easy way we do this is right click and invert our gradient. And now what's happening is we're getting our most 100% emission here, fading out into 0%. And what it's doing, if I come back into here and just move this over so we can see this, if I start to adjust these knots, we can see how this is adjusting this sort of light onto the screen, just to sort of like separate the two phones a little bit. And then we can even adjust this sort of like middle blending knot here, just so we get that nice fade out. And the final thing, because we don't want to be seeing this in our render, is we can just right click, we can go to Redshift, Object, and then we can go to Override again, and it's the same technique as we did with the tree, and we can uncheck primary ray visible, and it is hidden. And all I did was, if I turn that off, put one on top of this top phone and one on top of this bottom. And yeah, that was, of course, this would need like tweaking and defining to make these things like absolutely perfect. Like I'm not too, like I think not too happy with this or this. But yeah, if I had more time, of course, like the time like makes the render look better. So yeah, those are some little techniques that hopefully will come in handy to kind of perfect a little bit of lighting in your product shots.
Excellent. It still looks really cool though, Elly. And as you were going through those last few steps, I had keyed up a couple of questions which you were then answering. And Louise asked if to have the effect of the area light, but not the reflection, which is exactly what you just showed there. So that's good. Thank you for that. A question Fabio had is it faster to use unified sampling to reduce light noise or the light sampling override?
Oh, I would have to test. That's not something I've tested yet.
I also didn't test that, but what I tested is I made a comparison between like setting up all of the samples manually and enabling automatic sampling. And automatic sampling was, well, in my test cases, always faster than setting it up manually. So you can go to the Redshift render settings and system experimental options, and there you can enable automatic sampling. Exactly.
If there's one tip to take away from this session, that is it.
Yeah, that's a pretty important one. I check it all of the time. So
Yeah.
because this way you don't have to like take care of all of the other sampling options. It's just faster to set it up that way. But
yeah,
there is no right or wrong.
there's no right or wrong. There's just faster.
Yeah.
And I guess it's just
That's-
testing stuff out. Like I'm
Yeah.
I'm still relatively new-ish to Redshift, so I'm still testing loads of stuff out and seeing what works best for like different scenes, different lights.
Cool, excellent. And as Aaron says, there's no such thing as absolutely perfect. It's
I was just
probably,
reading that.
is the client happy?
That's true.
Great.
Cool, yeah, so those are the things I wanted to show. So yeah, I can throw it back to you, Jonas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So we've got a last few minutes on this, haven't we, Jonas? We're just going to like tie up a couple of things. So thank you for everyone for bearing with us, letting us overrun.
It's 5 to 10 more minutes, but I wanted to tell you one thing that is quite important, especially when you're working with transparent objects or transparent materials that are nested. So if I render this guy here, and I'm going to render this with standard renderer because it's very obvious in standard. It's also obvious in Redshift, but it's even more obvious here in standard. So if I render this, and well, you can see that the model is a glass with some fluid in it, like juice or something, and it's standing on some sort of ground or a table or whatever. So if we have a look at this model, and maybe let me deactivate the materials for now and enable the row shading so that we can see how this model is built. So what we have here is a glass which is perfectly standing on the ground, and all of these faces here, all of these polygons are perfectly on the ground. They are at y0. And on the other side, in the glass, what I did to create that fluid is I just created a loop cut here in the glass, and then I split this part off and created like a cap on top of it. So what I'm getting is, wait, that was wrong. Here we go. Is this? That's my fluid object. And these polygons here are exactly in the same position as the polygons here on the inside. So all of these polygons that you see here are in the same positions as the ones from the fluid. And that is causing problems. And what we need to get right here is our nested dielectrics. And so we need to accurately simulate the intersection of transparent materials with realistic results, and so that we don't have artifacts. And if I bring up the picture viewer again, you can see that we have a lot of artifacts here. So first of all, we've got this noise here on the floor, on the ground, and it also looks like the fluid is not going, like it's not going to the rim of the glass here, and that's simply not realistic. So there are things we need to take care about here in this shot. And so first of all, if you have the situation that you have a fluid in a glass, you always need to make sure that the objects, the glass and the other transparent material, are intersecting. That's important. So if they are, like here, just perfectly in the same place, that's not enough. That causes artifacts. So what we do in the fluid is we go to the coordinates tab, and here I'm gonna click here one of the S's, and then at Sx I type in 1.01, and I hold down Command and hit Enter, and this will bring up this will change the value for all 3 dimensions. So what we did is we scaled the whole fluid object a little bit up, and now we're going to render again. And look at this, it's completely different. So now we can clearly see that this fluid is going, well, until the very edge of this glass here. If we compare that to this one, you can see it's very different. But this is way more realistic. So always keep in mind that a fluid in a glass needs to intersect with the glass. But still, we have some noise down here. And here we have the opposite. We have a glass standing on, well, some other sort of material. And the point is that these are actually not allowed to intersect at all. So what we should do in this situation is we should grab the glass null here and just move it up a little bit, like 0.01. So you didn't realize a change in here, but if I render again, you can see that again, it looks now completely different, and this is the correct way. So from here to here, simply with the adjustment of a 0.01 range or value. So we're going from here to there. And the same thing happens in Redshift. If I just replace the materials here with the Redshift ones, and let me just bring this back to, well, I'm just going to show you the size of the glass one, because that's way more significant here. Maybe let me also quickly create a dome light and a dome light texture. Well, did I say quickly? I meant, let me just create it. And that's the wrong one. I'm not using Redshift at the moment. So here we go. Bear with me for a second, please. Here we go. I'm just going to get rid of the diffuse color and of the weight, and I'm gonna add an. What am I doing here? That's completely wrong. I was in the Cinema 4D.
It's because you're rushing.
Yeah, I'm rushing. So all you need to do, because we have a dome light, I just need to add it here. So HDR, and here we go. So what I was about to show was the Cinema 4D standard and physical workflow, but using a different renderer. That makes a difference. All right, so let's hit play, and here we go. So what you see here is, well, stripes here, like vertical stripes, and this looks wrong. And if I now make this a little bit bigger again, so this is something that you have in all renderers. That was the wrong one. I need to bring up the size of the fluid. Like so. And now it is correct, and you don't see the stripes anymore, which came from the, well, from the polygons not intersect. Yeah, that's it. So if you have something like that, like a fluid in a glass, which could also be like some sort of perfume or like just a bottle of Coke with Coke in it, obviously, then you would have to do it this way, that the fluid at least intersects the container just a little bit.
That's really interesting. That's very interesting in terms of how cinema considers those intersections and then how it then renders those out. So that's such a useful tip. And by the way, doing stuff at speed like that is wonderful to see you deliberately put in a thing there to guide us all that, all right, this is what you need to do for a Redshift versus cinema thing. So it's brilliant training.
Well, thank you.
The one thing I wanted to just ask, Jonathan's been very patient with his question that he asked a while ago, was just really something that just to get both of your thoughts on, to add some realism. So perhaps some 3D dust on the surfaces of any of the models of any of the projects you've been showing. Is that something that you typically do? Or is that something that you consider you do as a post in terms of doing it after the event, post-render?
No, actually, it's something I would try to render.
Yeah.
Because all of these little imperfections that you have, even if a product is new, you have like a little bit of variation in the roughness, for example, of a surface, stuff like that. Well, you definitely need to add that to the render, because it really adds realism. Even if it's just very simple, it's incredible how much it adds to the final quality of the rendering. So yes, definitely.
I think if you did it in post as well, it would always look like it was done in post. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense.
Kind of like an effects the real stuff in like a simulation or something.
Yeah, like exactly. You would have reflections that wouldn't really behave like reflections, and our eye is very trained in seeing something that is wrong, even if it's right. So you make it look even more right than reality sometimes, which is mind-blowing. But well, if you are in the industry, you get to the point where you walk outside and you see a scenario and you think like, if I did exactly that in 3D, nobody would believe me.
Absolutely.
Everyone would say, well, yeah, what a bad rendering.
Yeah. I always look at the clouds and think, those are badly composited.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly.
You never get away with that in the shot. Or worse, you look up at the sky and you think, oh, I'm sure I can see some artifacts.
Yeah. So the only advantage of this situation is that it's real time.
Yes, exactly. You're self-rendering.
Yeah.
Great. I'm going to grab the screen back and just show everyone where we're going to store the notes and the recordings. So let's make me presenter. Here we are.
Here you go.
And it should be. Am I? Oh, I am sharing. Great. Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone. By the way, there's a whole host of wonderful, lovely comments that you put in about the techniques that we're sharing and so on. And we try to strive a balance between doing preparing things and then being interactive as well, because it's that kind of middle ground there that is most useful, that replicates what you have on a day-to-day basis when you're working on creative projects. So that's really great to hear all the lovely words. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. And just really quickly to sum up, if you missed the beginning, it's such a busy week this week. We've got the 3D Motion Show, which is running for 3 days, and we're also presenting on the Post-Production World show. And although Post-Production World is a paid event, you can actually sign up for all the 9 sessions that we're doing on Wednesday this week. And you can sign up for free. Just look at that button on Post-Production World online, and also it's right next to the 3D Motion Show, which is also free. So we just got loads of stuff to throw at you this week. Absolutely. And then next week, we've got even more stuff about visualization, and we're looking a bit more about architectural as well, as you can guess from the smaller of the picture of the garage here. So please join us for that. And if you want to watch the recording, we are publishing all the recordings, including all the ones from all last year, on the Maxon training team on YouTube. So just search for that and you can see all of those, including we've got more than 100 small little quick tips that are 20 seconds in duration that just are memory joggers for you. And if you want more memory joggers, then you can always go to Cineversity, where we have many more tips literally thousands of tutorials, including these really handy Cinema 4D quick tips that Jonas puts together every week. I don't know how he found the time. I don't know how you find the time for this, Jonas, but in amongst everything else, every
Me
week.
neither.
Yes. Maybe you 3D printed a time machine. I think
Yeah.
that's what it is.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So thank you both. Thanks, Jonas, and thanks, Elly, for all those great examples. Right. And thanks, everyone, for staying with us.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for bearing with us.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Yeah,
Loved
we
it.
know that lots of you have stayed, so thank you. We won't keep you any longer, except to say, join us for all the other sessions this week. And we'll be back on next Monday as well. Excellent. So take it easy, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.